the research that we do have does show that people who eat higher levels, I'll say whole grains, people who eat higher levels of whole grains have lower levels of inflammation in the brain. That we do know. And people who get the fiber, this I think we're still learning about where the fiber comes from, like you mentioned, the beans and legumes. And sometimes that can make people feel worse, right? We know that that's a contributor to preserving the gut microbiome.
Pepsi and Coca-Cola famously switched. Before that, cane sugar was being used, which was much more expensive. It tended to crystallize and get granular.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to be speaking with one of the authors of a very, very popular book. It was one of the best-selling books in the diet category for a long time. And who would like to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease and lose weight at the same time? So the Mind Diet is your guide to eating and living for optimal cognitive health, weight loss, and longevity. And research shows that individuals who followed this diet that we'll be talking about today, they reduced their risk for Alzheimer's disease by 53%. And even those who followed it moderately well, they reduced their risk by 35%. So I'm very excited to have one of the authors, Jennifer Ventrelle, on the line with us. She's a registered dietitian. She's a fitness trainer, a mindfulness meditation teacher, and her work includes designing programs that integrate the Mind Diet and other lifestyle habits to reduce risk for cognitive decline and enhance overall well-being. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks to Laura for having me. Happy to be talking about this today.
Yeah. It sounds like this Mind Diet has made already a big impact on the lives of many people. So really excited to talk about it. I guess let's start with, how did you get interested and kind of stumble into this diet?
Yeah, great question. Well, I've always been interested in the health and wellness field. I think so. I'm a child of a mother who immigrated here from Italy. And when we ate, the guideline for food was the more is the better. And you clear your plate and it's given with love and all things are good in the world, right? But unfortunately, for health perspectives, especially after she, immigrated here and was able to kind of acculturate to the American diet and the standard American diet, things weren't quite as healthy. So unfortunately, we lost my father due to heart disease when I was 13 years old. And I think that's kind of what inspired my dedication to wanted to be in the healthcare field. So of course, I went to college and I thought I'm going to be pre-med, right? I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to cure, the patients of disease and such. And I took a general nutrition course and I just absolutely fell in love with this concept of, prevention and trying to get healthy before things get down that road. So of course, fast forward was when I met the lead author of our book, The Official Mind Diet, Dr. Martha Claire Morris, and she was really dedicating her career to the connection between nutrition and specifically prevention of Alzheimer's disease. And so that's what started my career into the brain health and wellness world. That was back in 2015.
Amazing. Well, let's start talking a little bit about the Mind Diet. What is the Mind Diet and how does it differ from other diets?
Yeah, great question. So the Mind Diet is, the simplest way to explain it is that it's a hybrid between the Mediterranean and the DASH diets. So as I mentioned, the lead creator, Dr. Morris, who sadly she passed away in February of 2020, but when she dedicated her career to this field and was researching what was out there, the Mediterranean diet was out there and showing great promise in terms of prevention of heart disease, their cardiovascular conditions, helping people maintain a healthy weight, and a lot of great research behind it. Also, the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And the primary outcome there was looking at how to help people reduce their blood pressure. And it showed significant reductions in blood pressure. So all of this really great research and outcomes were happening in the world of heart health. But what she recognized is that there was a gap. What are the foods and the nutrients that are most beneficial for the brain? So she and her team began to study large cohorts of individuals. So the diet was created at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, and they began to study cohorts of people around that area. They gave them what are called food frequency questionnaires and asked them how often they ate the foods and what amounts and how much of the foods. And so what they were able to do is they were able to find out the exact amounts and sort of doses of each food that were associated with cognitive decline and really prevention of cognitive decline, because they also gave them annual cognitive testing and exams. So what they found is that it was sort of like this marriage between the two diets with a few enhancements. So to answer your question, how does it differ? The main category that we really place a lot of emphasis on is vegetables. So we think vegetables are so important. We put the leafy green vegetables separate from the other colorful vegetables. And instead of recommending people just eat fruits and vegetables in general, we say that about the vegetables. And also for the fruits, there's just one actually particular fruit that has been shown to be effective for brain health and protective for brain health, and that's berries. So that's a distinction as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So, we've had people on in the past, and this is why I'm actually interested when I was reviewing your materials as well, because we've had people in the past who have said that, and I even read, I think, a book called like The End of Alzheimer's or something like that a long time ago. And it was, a lot of them talk about the keto diet, which is kind of a higher fat, as we know, diet. And I noticed that in your materials, you were talking about how saturated fat can actually be bad for brain health. And let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's interesting, because keto may be a little high in saturated fat, I guess, depending on how you're doing keto.
Yes.
But yeah, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think it's often left to interpretation. I think the key is what you just said there, Talor, how you're implementing the keto diet. For those who I'm sure a lot of your listeners, most of your listeners are familiar with the keto diet, but the most sort of classic ingredient is that it's very low carbohydrate. And so the carbohydrate foods, you've got all your grains and breads and crackers and snack foods, right? You have your starchy vegetables. So corn and peas and potatoes are eliminated. You've got your fruits. So all fruits, it's, careful not to eat too many fruits or you go over your goal for the total amount of carbohydrates that's recommended per day. And then also some dairy products like milk and yogurt. So when you think about all of the foods that are off limits, so to speak, on something like a keto diet, there's not a whole lot left besides foods that are higher in saturated fat. And so I think that's sometimes what happens is people don't end up paying as much attention or maybe aren't as educated in terms of what are some other options. But in terms of brain health and protection, I have to say it's unclear. The consensus, at least in our research group, has been it's unclear as to why there is a lot of evidence that people who eat grains and healthy sources of carbohydrate, and also now there's tons of evidence and research coming out about protecting the gut microbiome and the need for that fiber, which of course we get from those carbohydrate foods, are beneficial for that brain-gut connection. And those who consume those foods in higher amounts compared to those who consume them in lower amounts have lower rates of dementia. We know that. So yeah, it's unclear to me sort of the rationale for cutting all carbs out or most of the carbs out.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think you're right that many people, I'm sure, have a very hard time, first of all, even following the keto diet and keeping to under 30 grams of carbs or 20 grams of carbs per day, that what it is. I would certainly consider myself more on the low carb side. I wouldn't say I'm keto, but I just find that I naturally just do better lower carb myself. And so So let's, I guess, talk a little bit about carbs and what place they
Yeah.
have in the MIND diet. Now, and I'm not really referring to carbs from like green vegetables or, like salads or, there's minimal, I would say minimal amount of carbs there. But is there, what kind of carbs do you not like and what kind of carbs do you like, maybe
Yeah.
is a better
Yeah.
question.
Good question. Because there is, when we talk about the MIND diet food group categories, which I'm sure we'll get to, the
Mm-hmm.
grains and beans and legumes are two categories that are really predominant and high in carbohydrates, but they're the healthy carbohydrates. So the ones that I would advocate to eliminate or use only in moderation would be your refined carbohydrates. So things like white bread, your white pastas, your refined snack products and cakes and cookies and things like that, sweets. Those are going to be the things that are a little bit more offensive and are also coupled with the nutrients that we know place an increased risk for cognitive decline. And that's going back to what you mentioned before, the saturated fat, and then also sodium is connected there.
Oh, wow. That's another rabbit hole you just opened up there,
Yeah.
because, salt is cool again now. And we're being told by many top health influencers, I got to admit, even I've started saying, oh, I think maybe I do need a little more salt and adding salt to things. So and again, I think it's very unclear. And again, when we talk about salt, how much salt are we talking about?
Yeah.
Is it a person who doesn't get any sodium in their diet or already gets a lot of sodium in their diet? Are they sweating every single day because they're running 5 miles, or are they not? Right. So I'm sure there's no one size fits all, but tell me a little bit more about your salt.
Yeah, great question. And I think it goes back to here's where the individualization comes in. I think someone who is very active, you hit on a lot of the key points. If you're very active and you sweat a lot, you're going to lose salt or sodium through your skin, through your sweat, and you're going to need that replenishment. So someone like that, certainly, they might need a little bit more. I think when we talk about it as a risk is when the sodium is in excess for the individual person. So that's why applying research is a little bit hard, right? Because we have to extrapolate it to sort of all beings, and that's impossible to do. All we can do is use that as guidelines and then, tailor it to our own individual needs. So my common recommendation I will give to people on this topic of salt and sodium is, first and foremost, know your blood pressure. So that's in fact one key risk factor for dementia is cardiovascular risks. So if you have, and one cardiovascular risk is high blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, the research would say that about a third of all Americans, not just those who have high blood pressure, are what we call salt sensitive. So what that means is if they eat a bunch of sodium in their foods, their blood pressure is going to increase as a result of that. So for those people, I would say you want to be conscious of your sodium intake. You want to know the foods that have sodium in them, and you want to, try to modify that. For those who don't, for those who may be really active or just live a healthy lifestyle and their body can handle it, I think it's probably not the sodium in itself that's causing the risk. Again, it's what else is in the foods that are also high sodium. Often the high sodium foods are often the foods that are also high in saturated fat and also processed or ultra processed. Now, this is the new buzz nutrition word, ultra processed foods.
Yes. Got it. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if someone's not eating, like for myself, I've been kind of basically paleo for the most part. So I haven't been eating any bread or pasta or, any of those things that really have a lot of sodium. But my question, actually, more important question for people listening, how do we know if we're getting too much salt or if we don't have enough salt? Is there a test? Like, I guess, they measure sodium on a blood test, right?
It can't be done on a blood test. You'd have to do a urine analysis. And it's from, I'm not a physician, but from what I understand and from our research studies, it's a little bit more complex. You have to have someone that understands how to investigate that. But you could certainly request it. But you're asking a really great question. And I giggle sometimes when people ask me things like, well, how much sodium do I need in a day? Or how many calories do I need? And how many carbohydrates do I need, right? And the first question I'll ask back to them is, well, are you going to count your calories or sodium, or right? So you certainly can monitor, there's all types of apps that get really specific, and, hearing about your personal eating habits, I'm sure you're no stranger to the ability to self-monitor from some of those apps like, MyFitnessPal or Lose It or things like that. But I think also it's important to take a step back. So our approach that we recommend, and we certainly recommend this approach in the book, is rather than like diving in and getting to the weeds and every single calorie and gram of carbohydrate and sodium milligram, right? Might you be able to make some really impactful changes by just maybe even looking at your food groups? And if you know that some foods are higher in sodium and saturated fat, and maybe eat those a little bit less often, and some are more natural and more whole foods, and it's recommended to eat those more often, you can make the small changes, and it's all relative is what I like to tell people. So that's our recommendation, is to do it a little bit more mindfully versus counting and weighing and measuring everything.
Yeah. It should be, that's something though that I think probably more people should actually test and figure out, right? Because I mean, there are literally everyone I know now, like not everyone, but I see almost everywhere I go, I see people with these, there's an electrolyte powder that has 1,000 milligrams of sodium
They're
in
high. Yes.
one serving, right? And there are people that are like just taking this thing every day, and I'm like, okay, I don't know, like, is that good or is it not? It's weird.
So I think probably for your listeners, what I would recommend on that, again, I'm going to go back to blood pressure. I think that's the most direct relationship that sodium could be potentially harmful for, is going to be blood pressure. So that's what I would tell someone to do. I would say, make sure that your blood pressure is within range. For most people, that's 120/80. If you have other risk factors in your background, your doctor may have some specifications that are more specific for you that'll be a little bit lower than that, probably. But yeah, that's what I would say, is you probably shouldn't be drinking those packets if you have high blood pressure.
That makes a lot of sense. And I certainly agree with you. I think blood pressure is very highly overlooked. Again, I have a very personal experience. My father had very high blood pressure. He ended up having some strokes due to it. And then his really cognitive decline has gone tremendously downhill since then. So I certainly, it's something that I think not enough people really, and it's so easy. You can buy a thing from Amazon or CVS for like $30 or something and have your own blood pressure monitor and check it regularly. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
That's one of the really big risk factors, and specifically midlife high blood pressure has been most closely connected to progression of cognitive decline. So for all of us in between the ages of 30 and 60, we want to be making sure that we know we've got our finger on the pulse of that. No pun intended.
Yeah. One more thing I just want to ask you about this, because I've always felt that, and I probably wouldn't ask if I didn't hear that you were a meditation teacher as well. But blood pressure is one of those where this is my just personal opinion, it feels like there's a lot to do with internally emotions, how people handle stress and things of that nature. It seems to me that out of any kind of health marker that I've seen, blood pressure is the one that's probably the most emotionally driven or ability to handle stress on that. If you know people with high blood pressure, is meditation, or what do you think about that in general?
Yeah, I 100% agree with this. Yeah, this is another loving area of mind that I love to teach, and that's mindfulness meditation and mindfulness techniques in general. So what you're talking about now is sort of this idea of emotional reactivity, right? Like, how can we, what level do we have the ability to regulate our emotions and what happens to us, and therefore our reactivity, right? And there's definitely studies that are connected to this and show all different types of outcomes. The classic sort of program that is most commonly studied is called MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction. And it's a systematic way of paying attention to the breath on purpose, and then training your mind not to judge the things that are happening. Because all of us have reactions, whether it's internally or whether we act on them, right? Like all of us have that ability in our mind to be reactive. And it's this idea of the sooner we can recognize it, then we have our power back. Then we have the ability to say, okay, this is here and I can act on it or not. So that's easier said than done when you just hear it. But the beauty about the practice of meditation is when you're outside that sort of stressful interaction, you can do these focused breath exercises, and it starts to create new neural pathways in your brain so that you do have the ability to take that pause and you are able to be less reactive. And indeed, that does link to studies that show outcomes on all different types of health outcomes. Blood pressure is one. Even the perception of pain, that's actually where the program started, was in pain clinics. If I can't control my patient's pain, Jon Kabat-Zinn is the original creator of what we Westerners know as this mindfulness meditation practice. And he said, okay, these are my most difficult patients in my pain clinic. And for some of them, I can't solve their problem. I can't cure their pain, right? So if I can help them train their brain to change their relationship to the pain, change their perception of what pain is. Again, I think of it as taking your power back. You're in control.
I absolutely love that. I think that's incredible. I would say on a personal, not to get sidetracked too much from the health and the mind diet, but on my own personal development journey, I would say the biggest thing I've been working on for the last few years as well is how do I be less reactive?
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny, the word you said, pause, that's really the key, right? When something comes up, can you pause and take a step back and stop this cycle, this loop of like this annoyance and angry and then just, splurting out whatever you feel like saying because you're angry and you're triggered. Can you control that? Right. And it's the biggest challenge in the world, I think for most people. But is there any, like, for people who are listening, they're like, I want to learn about that breathing and what you just spoke about. Is there any resources or anything people can learn that?
Yeah, so I was trained by the UC Center for Mindfulness, UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness. And I love their website. They've got a great tips and tools, even online programs if you can't, be there to participate in person. But that's my go-to for when. Also, if you're interested in practicing, because it's never too early, no matter how much you know already or don't know on this topic, never too early or late to be practicing. One of the things that I would say is a lot of free meditations, short practical meditations available on an app. The app I use is called Insight Timer. And any topics you can look for, and you can find teachings, you can find guided meditations, things like that through that app.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've used that app in the past. Insight Timer. That's great.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the different food groups. Let's get back into that. Tell us about that.
Great. Sure. So there's 10 foods on what we would call the list of foods to choose. And as I mentioned, the most important ones are vegetables. So we put leafy green vegetables in a separate category from other colorful vegetables. That's where our carotenoids and our antioxidant nutrients are going to live. And a tip I usually like to tell people with this group is the more color, the better. So the pigment actually supplies the produce, whether it's a fruit or vegetable, with the nutrients, the antioxidant nutrients and carotenoids. So that's a good tip, is look for the color when you're shopping for your veggies. And then, as I mentioned, the only fruit is berries. Berries are the highest in fiber and lowest in sugar. So if you're interested in maintaining a healthy weight or even looking for some weight loss, that's usually the go-to fruit that I recommend. And then a category of what I would call unsaturated fats. So here's where our extra virgin olive oil is, and our plant-based omega-3 fatty acids in nuts and seeds, and then nut butters as well. So for olive oil, we recommend 2 tablespoons a day. And for the nuts and seeds, it's 5 ounces in a week. Those were the levels that were shown to be connected to prevention of Alzheimer's disease. So then there's also animal-based sources of your healthy fats. So the particular nutrient that seems to be particularly protective in the brain is an omega-3 fatty acid that we really only get from fish. And that's going to be your DHA specific omega-3. So things like salmon, albacore tuna, mackerel, if you like that, and sardines, things like that. So that's smaller fish. So if you're not a fish eater, or you, as long as you're not allergic, what we usually say is if you can even just get it in once per week, that was the level. And that's also distinguished from the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet, I think, is like 3 or 4 servings of fish they recommend per week. But for brain health and the Mind Diet studies, it was shown that all fish and seafood, as little as consumption of once weekly, was shown to be neuroprotective.
Nice.
So then there's the whole grains and the beans, which I already mentioned. Whole grains is consistent with the U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans. So it's 3 times a day. And then the beans is 3 times per week, which is shown to be protective. And then the last food on the list to choose is kind of a controversial one right now, because there has been more research coming out showing that, especially for cardiovascular outcomes, it's not as healthy, and that is wine. So in the original Mind Diet studies, 5 fluid ounces a day of wine was shown to be neuroprotective. Those individuals who drank wine at that level, even above those individuals who didn't drink at all, actually were shown to have greater progress in terms of cognitive preservation. But now I always tell people, this is why we need a lot of studies, because there's more studies that show that are contradicting that. So I would say we probably need more research on that one as well. And we never want to start drinking if we're not a drinker to begin with. So those are the 10 foods on our list to choose. Very
interesting. Very interesting. I'd be careful about a bunch of people probably just went and started bringing out the old bottles of wine that the last podcast told them to put away. But no, I think you also have to know yourself and know, like for me, if I have 1 glass of wine, I just feel completely awful the next day. And I can see it in my sleep score. I can see it, in the way I feel. So for me, it's just pretty clear that it's not for me. Other people can have multiple drinks and seem to be 100% fine the next day. So, that's certainly a very controversial and tricky one. The other one I would really, I would want to ask you again. I kind of just ask questions for my own knowledge. Yeah. I'm very curious about this, and so I've stayed away from legumes and grains because I had a lot of inflammation in my body. That's why I went on the paleo diet about 11 years ago or so, and I had lots of pain and inflammation in my fingers, arms, all the way down my arms. And, going on the paleo diet and kind of eliminating anything that was kind of potentially inflammatory, which I think is kind of the same concept with like dementia and cognitive decline, is if you have inflammation in the brain, that's obviously going to cause more cognitive decline. So I'm curious about like the grains and the legumes. I mean, there's been a lot of fear around legumes potentially being bad for gut health or the lectins and all those kind of things, as well as the grains and kind of 3 servings of grains per day also kind of sounds a little bit like a lot. Can you expand on those a little bit?
Yeah, I can. So I like that you keep coming back to your experience. And I like that you connected it to your experience when you were eating those foods compared to when you were not eating those foods and how you felt. So I think this is where the fields of nutrition and research and mindfulness really converge in the best way. Because I'll be clear that if someone comes to me and says, I want to try the paleo diet, or I want to try the keto diet or Whole30 or, fill in the blank, whatever it is. My response to them is not, oh gosh, no, don't do that. You have to follow the mind diet, right? In fact, we used to joke that it's probably silly that it was even named the mind diet, because we really don't want people to think of it as a diet. We want people to think of it as a starting point for a potentially brain healthy eating pattern that could be like an initial blueprint. But it doesn't stop there. I think you need to go in and you need to ask yourself, okay, what works for me? What's going to be best for me? Because I truly believe, I wrote a diet book. I'm a co-author of a diet book, and I don't believe that there is one diet for everybody. Right. I believe in that idea of mindful eating in the sense of more than just, tasting your food and checking in with your hunger. That's a component of mindful eating. But another component of mindful eating is really getting back to your body and knowing how you feel, and how, again, the control that you have, that you're making your body feel. And food is huge in that. Food is really huge in that. So I always say my job is to know the research. So what you're talking about now, Pelor, maybe we don't have enough research studies and people who have demonstrated the symptoms that you're talking about, that we can get a good clinical trial and show that for this group of people, grains and beans are not good, right? Mm-hmm. So my job is to say, okay, what we do know is that the research that we do have does show that people who eat higher levels, I'll say whole grains, people who eat higher levels of whole grains have lower levels of inflammation in the brain. That we do know. And people who get the fiber, this I think we're still learning about where the fiber comes from, like you mentioned, the beans and legumes. And sometimes that can make people feel worse, right? We know that that's a contributor to preserving the gut microbiome. However, that's for those people who entered the studies that didn't have any what we call exclusion criteria. So if I'm studying beans and legumes, and Pelor, you want to participate in my research study, and you tell me, well, I seem to be allergic, I'm going to tell you don't qualify for my study, right? So I think the message here is know yourself in the sense of being willing to experiment. So to come full circle, if someone came to me and said, I want to try this, I would say, please do. Pay attention to how you're feeling. Keep a diary of your symptoms before and after 3 days after, especially for something like whole grains and gluten-containing products, because it can stay in our system by up to 3 days. So you might think you're reacting to something you ate yesterday, but maybe it was 2 or 3 days ago. And then check in with how you feel when you're eating the foods. And then also check in with your realistic ability to continue that, right? Like I see people set these really unrealistic goals. Like, I'm never going to eat any sweets again in my life. Right? I'm never going to have ice cream again, or cake, or it's like, it's just, it's unrealistic. So what can you do that makes you feel good and is a balance between the evidence that we know we have and what makes you feel good in your body? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are your favorite, like when you say grains, are you eating bread, or what are your favorite grains?
So yes, I do eat bread. Yes. And I look for whole grain, all the products. So, before I got on with you, I had a snack of these Norwegian crisp bread crackers. I buy them at Trader Joe's, and I had some hummus on there. So there's beans, right? And some cucumbers. So that was my little snack before I got on with you. I can tell you that I will not touch whole grain pasta. I am Italian and I'm going to eat the white pasta, and it's going to be, Sundays when I'm with my family, and I know how to do it in an amount that doesn't get out of control and unhealthy to make my body feel bad, right? But that's usually what I tell people. There's other grains out there. You could do something like a whole grain brown rice or wild rice, something like that. But also, look for protein as well. Quinoa is actually complete protein. Bulgur and barley, those are ones that I often do as well. So just a variety, whatever, again, tastes good to you.
Interesting. Yeah. And that was a great point you made before as well about the people in the studies have to fit the criteria of the studies and not have any exclusionary things. And so therefore they may be less reactive compared to if we just did a general population study. That's really interesting as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And you make a good point there too, because the original Mind Diet studies were they were cohort studies. So they didn't do, this was before I joined the team. They didn't do an intervention. They didn't say, eat these 10 foods, stay away from these 5 foods, or limit these 5 foods, and let's see what happens. Over a period of, 15, 20 years now, they've been studying the same people, and they're free living, free eating. And then they just ask them what they eat and then see those. So that's how they created the diet. They pulled out those foods that were most connected to benefits of brain health. And then we did do a clinical trial on the Mind Diet, and our participants really loved the Mind Diet, so much so that the participants that we asked to follow their usual diet started following the Mind Diet. So it kind of muddied up the research waters there. But we have some new research outcomes on that. We recently just went back and put everybody in the same group and looked at the people who had higher Mind Diet scores compared to those who had lower Mind Diet scores. And they had higher cognitive functioning at the end of our 3 years compared to those who had lower scores.
Amazing. Is there anywhere people can see this research on a website or somewhere?
Yeah. So if you go to our website, it's just theofficialminddiet.com. We have a research tab, and we've got a lot of different topics there. But one of our first posts was on the foundational research. So that's the cohort studies that I've been talking about. And then I just recently made a post about our recently released information that was presented at our Alzheimer's Association International Conference back in July this year.
Nice. Amazing. I do want to also ask you about the foods to avoid.
Yes. I thought we were going to get to those. Yes. So there's 5 foods, and I would say limit, because again, we found that the early researchers found that lower consumption of these foods was what was associated with better cognitive outcomes. So the 5 foods are red and processed meats, cheese, full fat cheese, butter. Wow. I know, that's the one that's sad for me, is the full fat cheese. Butter, sweets, and then the 5th food is fried foods, deep fried foods. Yes, so things that count in that category that people often forget go in that category are like potato chips and snacky foods like those that they don't realize are deep fried.
Yeah, especially when they are deep fried in seed oils, I can imagine.
Right.
Probably even worse. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. So what about, you mentioned red meat and processed meat. Yeah, certainly processed meat. I think where a lot of people might say, well, what about grass-fed, grass-finished, meat? What about that? Any room for it?
Yeah, I think we don't have enough evidence. Again, let me say it in this way. I don't think we have well-designed studies that isolate grass-fed organic beef from the regular processed stuff, right?
Yeah.
And maybe if we did, we might see a difference, because I am aware that the nutritional composition is slightly different. What's not different is the saturated fat content. So it would suggest that something other than the saturated fat content would ameliorate the effects of the ill effects of whatever else was in that food. Or to say that in the opposite way, that, it's not only the saturated fat that's harmful, it's also likely the sodium. And there was a really interesting study that just came out, again, really big population study, but over 40,000 people they were able to include in these analyses, and came out of the Nurses' Health Study, which is a big cohort study that's ongoing. And they looked at the difference between processed meat and unprocessed meat. So it's slightly different from what you're talking about, because now we're talking about sausages, bacon, you're really
cold
processed
cuts and stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Things like that. Compared to something like you're talking about, a natural, perhaps grass-fed meat. And there was a difference. It was found that people who eat the processed red meat increased risk for dementia by 14% compared to the unprocessed meat. Unprocessed meat still had a little bit higher risk, but not as high as the processed meat. Processed meat was most offensive. And the thing, maybe you won't find this personally exciting, but they also said if you trade out one serving of red meat per day for one serving of either beans and legumes or nuts, then it reduced risk by 23% in that analysis.
Wow. Very interesting. Yeah. I do think there, like you said, it's when people are like, oh, meat is bad. I'm like, well, are we talking about a McDonald's burger that you're having with fries and a soda? Or are we talking about grass-fed meat that you're eating with lettuce and avocado or something, right? Like, so yeah, there's certainly some factors there, but yes, this is very interesting data. I love fish. I love salmon. So I'm kind of more of a, I actually, a lot of the stuff I've been hearing from guests on this podcast make me want to eat more grass-fed red meat, actually. But that's why I love getting different viewpoints on it, because I, take in all the information, and just like everyone listening now should be taking in all the information and making their own decisions and testing out, what works best for them. But I've honestly just, my body craves fish. It doesn't crave really red meat. So I can feel that, and I feel good on it, and I feel lighter on it and things like that. So, but this is all really interesting, really fascinating. And it's quite counter, right? Even like the full fat dairy, right? That's a big part of the, ketogenic diet that supposedly other people say is good for the brain, right? But so this is really, really interesting information.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share it, because I think the best way you can empower people is giving them all the information, and then allowing them to kind of make the choice.
100%. And I agree with you 100%. There is no one size fits all for everyone. So we've seen people that do great on a vegan diet, and we've had people on here that are doing amazing on a carnivore diet, right? And everything in between. So certainly really appreciate you sharing. And obviously what I truly appreciate even more is that this is backed by actual studies, actual information that we can go read about. This has been amazing. Where can people buy the book, or if you guys have any training programs, or where can they learn more?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We do. Yeah. So everything you'll find on our website, theofficialminddiet.com. And we do. So we offer, Laura and I, who is my other co-author, and she's also a trained culinary chef, and she did all the recipes in our book. We have over 60 recipes. We tried to align the book in a 6-week program for people to follow, so that it's behaviorally easy to integrate these things, rather than just saying, here's this diet, follow it. And so what we tried to do was put some yummy recipes and things in there. So we've got a lot of free recipes and tools on our website. We just recently made our 6-week program an on-demand offering if people are interested in that. And we'll be doing another live program for that in January.
Amazing. Highly recommend people check it out. I personally am a believer more and more that as we age, I'm seeing it firsthand with, family members of my own. It's like cognitive health and keeping your cognitive abilities as you age is one of the biggest keys to happiness as you get older. It's so important. And so, the sooner we can start thinking about that and changing our priorities and around having better cognitive health, I know I am, the better. So really appreciate all the work that you're doing here and highly recommend people check out the official minddiet.com.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.